So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lakeisha Hull. I am the Planning Director for Prince George's County. You are here for session number 10 of the Brown Bag Series. If this is your first session, welcome. We're super happy that you're here. We also have folks here at Largo headquarters, so if you're in the Largo area, please come down to our headquarters to also visit this in person. We have a little bit of refreshments here, and it's also another way to interact with not only the planning director's office, but also the presenters for today. So with that being said, if there's any special guests online, which everyone is, any incorporated areas, we thank you so much for coming through. Any mayors, elected officials, we're really excited for your presence during this brown bag session. So today we're going to talk about planned development zones. And so it's going to be a great topic to help expose everyone to what the code says and what the process entails. We also will have time for Q&A, so I do have some great presenters here. And so with that, I will turn it over to the team to introduce themselves and to go through the rest of the presentation. Thank you again.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm gonna do a quick recap of last session. Ho John Garland, supervisor of the urban design section, presented an overview of the zoning and urban design review process and development standards. As the director mentioned, today's session focuses on planned development zones with the general purpose and review processes, I assume. Our next session will be on July 8th at noon again, and we will gather to discuss development standards and neighborhood compatibility standards. So please remember that the registration closes for next session. The registration closes, it opens today and closes 1 week before the session. So it closes on July 1st. So please be mindful of the registration window. And we are excited to announce that we're gonna host the second cycle of Brown Bag sessions. The first session will be on September 25. We will be sending you by email more details on how to sign up and what the topics are. We are excited because this is an effort where we used all your feedback through all this first cycle of sessions, and we're gonna have special guests, not only guests from the planning department, but also from other agencies. So we're excited, and we hope you can continue joining us for these second sessions. With no further ado, I'm gonna pass the mic to Jeremy Hurlbut, supervisor of the zoning section. Jeremy.
Thanks, Natalia. Welcome everyone who made it in today and everyone online. So today's agenda will kind of talk about, we already had introductions, we'll talk about what is a planned development zone, what are the required public benefits within this zone, and what is the development review process of this, as well as touching on kind of where zoning falls within our development review division. And what you need to do to achieve a good planned development, as well as what parts of the county are eligible for planned development zone rezoning, and just kind of the requirements of the rezoning as a whole. So what is a planned development zone? First, let's talk about what that is. So this was a slide that Ho Zhang had used in the previous presentation to kind of tie two presentations together, and so you have this futuristic view of a development. And so really a planned development zone is to allow flexibility to provide high quality development and benefits for the public and the county, right? So as new technologies, things maybe we haven't anticipated come along, this is a tool that allows for, that innovation and, to adapt to what the market is asking for. Next slide. So where does the zoning fall in the development review process? Let's just kind of talk about where my section's housed. Next slide. So there's really 7 major elements of the development review process as we kind of highlight. Those include master planning, zoning, subdivision, site planning, final plat, permitting, and enforcement. And so today we'll really focus on zoning and the steps to achieve a planned development zone. Next slide. There are three kind of categories of rezonings. There's comprehensive rezoning, sectional map amendment rezonings, which are kind of done by our community planning sections. And then the zoning section handles what are called zoning map amendments. Now, on top of all that, there are legislative text amendments. This is changing the text of the code and not necessarily the map. Next slide. And so comprehensive plan zone is really most recently had been done in 2022. This is, as it says, comprehensive, so it's looking at all the properties in the county, and this was implemented as part of our rezoning to reestablish either all the properties to the new naming conventions of the zones and to make modifications where the council saw fit. Next slide. Likewise, a sectional map amendment is also master plan rezoning. So we have a number of different master plans. Currently, we have 3 master plans being updated in the county now. And it's through that process, there's testimony that's taken about why properties should be rezoned. In addition, there are goals and policies set in the master plans that necessitate rezoning. And so those master plans ultimately rezone some properties. Next slide. And then there is the zoning map amendments. And there are subcategories within this, which include what I call traditional ZMAs. These are piecemeal zonings based on change or mistake, and there's a very high legal bar to that change or mistake, which is a term that comes from the state code for rezoning. There's also Chesapeake Bay critical area overlay rezonings, which rarely happen. It's really adding property to that overlay, which makes additional restrictions to protect the environment and the waterways around the Chesapeake Bay. And then what we're really here to talk about today is the planned development zoning map amendment, which is project specific, and so that can be a couple acres or it can be a couple hundred acres. But it encourages that flexibility and the innovation and alternatives to current zoning requirements that we have at this point. Next slide. So what are planned developments? There are 7 different zones that you can be rezoned to as a planned development, and I'll run through those. 3 of which have minimum area requirements, but all have locational standards, and you'll kind of see a reoccurring theme as we run through these. The first is the RPD. Next slide. And the RPD stands for Residential Plan Development. It requires a minimum density of 15 dwelling units per acre. And if you provide non-residential use, the minimum FAR of 0.25, the minimum area is based on the density, and so you can kind of see in the chart there's different categories of the land area based on how dense the project is going to be, and the project must be in a residential base zone, so that locational standard. So you can't add a subdivision to something that was zoned to be an activity center. Next slide is the neighborhood activity center planned development zone. Again, the minimum density of 10 dwelling units per acre in this zone. And in this case, the locational standards are tied to kind of center designations in the general plan or a master plan. So it needs to be in a neighborhood center or the innovation corridor or the portion of Route 1 between DC. And so you'll see that reoccurring, so I won't reiterate that on some of these coming forward. Next slide is the Town Activity Center Plan Development Zone, sorry. And so again, like normal or the base town activity center zones, it's broken into core and edge elements and standards for those. And so you can kind of see the different elements for that, as well as you know, the locational standards that again go to that town center designation and other elements for where you can place those. I'll try and catch up here. Next slide is the local town or local transit oriented plan development zone. These are local transit centers in the growth policy or general plan. And again, those innovation corridor in the Route 1 area that allow for the flexible zones such as this. Next is the regional transit oriented plan development zone. This allows for the highest density and again, same locational standards. So, you know, there is really, all these standards will be developed as part of the plan development zone, and we'll kind of touch on that a little bit more as we get more into the process. Next, these are kind of the other activity or plan development zones, and one is the mixed use plan development zone, which has a minimum area of 2 gross acres unless the district council finds a compelling reason why it should be less than that. So it gives some flexibility to the council to allow that. And it also sets maximums inside and outside the beltway of how big the property can be. This also, unlike the other zones, puts restrictions on where mixed use plan development zones can go. So, you know, we don't want this in the rural areas of the county. We don't want it in residentially zoned areas of the county, or, you know, and should really be kind of classified within centers and local transit areas as well. So, next slide. And the last is the industrial/employment plan development zone. This also has a minimum of 5 gross acres unless the council finds otherwise, and kind of goes into locational standards. You know, these are employment areas identified in the growth or the general plan, or those that are zoned industrial or industrial employment. So pretty kind of straightforward. The names kind of lends itself to where they should be and the requirements. So as we talk about PD zoning process, a lot of this will go back to the base zones. And so what the PD zones are allowing applicants to do is kind of create their own standards. And the process, as we look at the flow chart, kind of, you know, in our process, and those of you who are familiar with the process, some of you in the room understand this, that this is one of these applications that requires a pre-application meeting and pre-neighborhood meeting, as well as which is kind of unique in our review, requires 2 public hearings. So it requires a public hearing before the planning board, who will make a recommendation to the county council, and then another public hearing in front of the district council or the zoning hearing examiner. So just like any application within the development review division, it requires notice, which is kind of highlighted on the other slide, but because it is going to the zoning hearing examiner, the district council, and the planning board, all of these are going to require mailings. There's also a requirement for an ad in the newspaper, as well as posting of the ZHE hearing and the planning board hearing. So signs will be posted on the property, so people are aware of changes are coming. Now we kind of talk a little bit more about the decision standards. And so these are kind of the basic standards that it's conforming with the general plan and the master plan. So some of that goes back to the location, but it also goes to, you know, what the policies and objectives of that plan may be for that area of the county. It also, you know, each plan development zone, which I didn't get into the details of, has purposes and kind of for what that should be happening if you're rezoning to that plan development zone. So you have to show conformance to that, as well as satisfying all the applicable standards within the code. So as you're developing this property, you still have to conform with the design standards or create alternatives or modify those design standards through this process, and have that approved. And it also has to kind of fit and work with what surrounds the project. So the next slide. So the general standards for all plan development zones and what we kind of see as the things that have been the newest to applicants and also to this process are really four things. The basic plan, which was something that happened with other rezonings, modifications of those development standards, public benefits, which is a key component of this, and proposed conditions. So the applicant needs to provide all these things, as well as addressing kind of all the standards that a normal zone would require, like setbacks, height. You know, they need to tell as part of their application what they plan for the development to do in those regards. And you know, so as we kind of talk a little bit more about the basic plan, next slide. Yeah, the basic plan is really just a representation of what is being requested as part of the plan development, and will be a guiding document for future applications. So, you know, a rezoning or a plan development rezoning is the first in three major steps, which include the preliminary plan of subdivision where adequacy will be tested, as well as detailed site plans, which will really kind of say, this is where the sidewalk, the buildings, parking, all those things are going to happen on the site. But these also include the development standards on this plan. It can include the public benefit features. So like in this plan, you know, open space is part of those things, and so forth, and different parts of the commercial and whatnot. The other component is modification to the standards. So this table is taken from the code and kind of explains that you kind of have to have a really good idea of what you ultimately want when you come in for a plan development rezoning, because you have to change all the rules right at this point, at the very beginning of the process, because most of these things have to be modified at the time of plan development rezoning. Some of the things that you are not required to be modified are because there's other components of the code that do allow you to modify them later, further down the process, or simply we're not going to allow for changes in those things, such as how much open space you're providing, and things like that. Next slide. And so let's talk more about the public benefits in detail. Sorry. Yeah, so this is kind of the cheat sheet for public benefits that we talk about. And so the code mentions a couple buzzwords such as superior, quite a lot. So public benefits are superior features in the plan development zone that benefit the surrounding neighborhood and the public in general to significantly greater extent than would be achievable under the base zone. So, you know, we're really looking for higher quality development than what could be achieved in that zone today. And the really hard thing about this is how you tangibly quantify those benefits. How do you measure those? And how are those going to be benefits for the surrounding community, but also the county as a whole? And how are they going to be significantly exceeding the standards that are found in Part 6 of our zoning ordinance, which are the normal development standards? Next slide. So as the planned development zone has grown, we've added a list to the code of some of the type of public benefits that different plans and different, that we've heard are desirable for these type of developments. And so they can include things such as superior design, which we talked about, if that's landscaping, urban design, architecture. How you demonstrate that is key, as well as public art or affordable housing. And you can kind of see some of the examples that it's not the exhaustive list that's in the code, but it also allows for you to essentially proffer or offer anything that you really think may be a benefit. So we know as time goes on, and depending on community needs and what they vocalize, or what new studies and plans lay out, that these benefits may change and there may be things that are more desirable for rezoning in a certain part of the county. Next slide. And so the last element of this is proposed conditions. So normally we're applying conditions to development at the time of near the end, because there are things we feel are needed to make the project work. And in this case, since applicants are coming and saying, we're going to give you these public benefits in exchange, essentially for this rezoning, and how, all those different types of public benefits that are listed there, there's a lot it's key that the conditions lay out the timing and how we're going to secure those benefits. So if it's affordable housing and that there's going to be a deed recorded against the land that ensures that the housing will be affordable, or if it's that, you're going to dedicate so much more open space, whatever it may be, that's going to be the public benefit, the conditions at the onset of this applications are key to making sure those things happen. So that's my overview of the planned development zone. I'm happy to take any questions that anyone may have, and my contact information is on the slide. Yes.
We do have one that was emailed to us ahead of time. Why do the residential Prince George's County ordinances apply to developers? However, once they are done with construction, the applicability does not extend to resident to resident. Is this correct?
Okay, you might need to re-say that, yeah.
Why do the residential Prince George's County ordinances apply to developers? However, once they are done with construction, the applicability does not extend resident to resident. Is this correct?
So residential zoning applies universally between the developer or a resident. How it's enforced may be somewhat different. There may be elements of an individual lot that doesn't achieve a building permit. I'm not sure if that's what that question's getting at. But those are things that can always be, sent into the Department of Permitting, Enforcement, and Inspection for enforcement action if they're not complying with a setback or something like that. So maybe they can elaborate on that question. Yes.
Good afternoon. My question was about the public benefits. one of the things I did not notice was traffic management. Because there's some development, you go into areas and the roads are narrow, they're heavy traffic, generally speaking. And when you go and you're going to add more development, where it's business, where mixed use, how are you going to manage the extra traffic that is going to be coming through this development, and also parking needs? I didn't see those mentioned in the public benefits.
Yeah, so the zoning code obviously anticipates those concerns for all development. And so there's currently a process, and as I spoke about the rezoning and then the preliminary plan of subdivision, if, it reaches a threshold that is going to create an impact, which is, that a mixed-use development or some of these larger developments, like the basic plan you saw, will create, then there is an adequacy test for traffic. And as part of that, the mitigation is improvements. We have had developers essentially include public benefits of, enlarging roads as part of their public benefits to accelerate the improvements of those things. But since we already have that process in place, we aren't necessarily encouraging that, just because it's hard to kind of rationalize how much of a benefit that is if they were already going to be required to improve the road. So those type of things. And the same goes for parking. There are parking standards and ways to deviate from the parking. And obviously the parking leads to the trips that causes the transportation issues, right? So.
I'm late coming into your most excellent presentation, and it's good information that you provided, and thank you very much. With that said, you may have already explained a zoning text amendment, and if you haven't, could you lay out the process and how it differs from what you've presented?
Yeah, we touched very briefly on legislative text amendments, and so a text amendment is different from the plan development zone in that it's only amending the text. So it may say that, we want to change the dimensional requirement for the zone as a whole. And so instead of the front setback in the residential zone of being 25 feet, we may want it to be 5. And so that's something that can happen, and it's usually initiated with a petition to the council, the district council, and because they are the legislative body, and so they would handle that. In this case, we are developing new standards for a project-specific area and rezoning the property to just those standards. So one of the things I didn't touch on is how this compares to our prior zoning ordinance, where we had comprehensive plan development zones, which did something similar. And in general planning terms, there's something called plan unit development. So it's kind of like that, where you're taking a piece of property, you're rezoning it, and allowing different standards to apply than would normally be there in the base zone. So that's, back in the 80s, how you saw the rise of new urbanism, bringing houses closer to the street, or zero lot development, where you have houses that are on the side property line with one side yard, and different standards and things like that. I think we have an online question.
For public benefits, is there a separate application process or permit required to add public art as a benefit?
No. So the public art would be incorporated into the project. The details of that would be shown later on in the detailed site plan, and as long as it's incorporated within that, it would be part of your building permit unless DPI required something else, depending on, if it's a structure or a sculpture or something of significance, they may require a separate building permit for that.
Okay, so I know that like all these new zones, NAC, TDO, I mean, LTO, et cetera. So can you just apply for a rezoning to the, like, the NAC PD, or can you only do an NAC PD in an existing NAC zone? So, because the way I thought it was, it's like, okay, you have to have that base zone, NAC or LTO, and then you can apply for a rezoning to the PD for like increased density or increase something else, and then you give the public benefit, et cetera, et cetera. Or can you just randomly say, oh, I want NACPD?
So to your point, yes, generally the base zone goes with the PD zone. But as you kind of saw in those tables, there's a couple targeted areas that allow for multiple PD zones within it. So depending on, the specific requirements and the minimum density or the maximum density, you may choose to pick a different PD zone because you don't want to provide that much density, or you want to provide more density. And so, like I said, the RTO is the highest. So if you're looking to go with the biggest building, and you can do NAC and LTO and RTO on the same property, then you would probably pick the RTO to get the biggest. But if you were looking to do a smaller development and you didn't want to meet the minimum requirement, you would maybe do NAC. So it just depends on what the project specific goals are. But generally, you're correct. It's kind of one PD zone idea for all the properties kind of throughout the county.
How does adding triplexes and duplexes benefit the community without building schools, community centers, and libraries?
That's a little bit outside of what we're talking about today, but
Yeah, I agree. I can talk about that a little bit because I think in general the question is, how is public infrastructure supported when we're talking about rezoning properties and probably bringing more density, right? So we do that through other avenues. Jeremy spoke a little bit about preliminary plans of subdivision. At that stage, there are several tests of adequacy that go over those things. There's also impact fees associated with schools, for example, where every new development pays an impact fee to support the development and redevelopment, expansion of schools, and so forth. Some of the other features, such as community centers and libraries, are done through other master planning processes. And those aren't necessarily developed based on a project by project. It usually takes a much larger area, a sector or a master plan area, to support development of schools, of libraries, of community centers. And those are typically done in those master and sector plans. There are some developments in themselves that will provide a community center for their specific development. There are a lot of large developments that have their own community center that will support their residents. So those are kind of outside the scope of the PD rezonings that Jeremy is talking about in regard to that process. But yes, we recognize that they do contribute to the overall density of the county, and those impacts are examined in other ways.
For public benefit features, what are the metrics for determining the quantity of benefits needed for a specific application proposal? The prior zoning ordinance had density increments based on allowed units per amount of measurable benefits. The new zoning ordinance has a list of options, but no scalable guide for how many PBFs would be needed to fulfill goals of the zoning ordinance, master plans, etc. Thank you.
yeah, so currently in the planned development zone, there isn't a specific matrix. And so there is some discretion of the proving body to decide if it's enough. We try, to really focus on what we were talking about in terms of, tangible and quantifiable, and being superior to what's at the base zone. So when we look at it, if you're looking to double the density or if you're looking to increase the density by 25%, there has to be a relationship to the amount of public benefit you're providing in that regard. And we've seen, some projects that weren't increasing the density really at all. And we've seen others that are increasing it by a percentage. And so, that has been one of the, learning points, and it's really kind of somewhat dependent on the planning board and the district council and what their vision and their goal and what they believe is achievable between that, and it's really depends on the project as well. So the public benefit, as I listed in the slide, one of them may be the economic impact. And so if the project is seen as being a generator of other projects and, helping to provide other community resources, then that may be, given more weight than maybe a mural on a building would be given in terms of achieving a project goal or something like that. But in other parts of the county, we just had one that's was approved that's between a metro station and a Purple Line station, and the affordability was seen as being the true public benefit of that project, right? So you have this very desirable piece of property that is going to provide a lot of connection and easy transit for people, and especially those people who may not have the benefit of the cars and the parking spaces. And so having an affordable project in the heart of that neighborhood is maybe more beneficial than some of the other benefits that are listed here. And we've also had projects that kind of cluster them all together. And so it's kind of, how much it is better. But when we're typically talking to an applicant, we're saying, you need to provide more open space than would normally be required. You need to provide more parks than would be normally required. You need to, your design, your architecture has to have more windows, has to have more projections, has to be at a higher quality level of materials, those type of things, and you have to demonstrate those things.
How much are we increasing the county density by in terms of residences?
So I think the important thing there is to really kind of focus on the component of the plan development and conforming to the master plan goals. And so our master plan or our general plan already kind of say how much density should be located in an area. And so we're taking the guidance from that, those plans to kind of help in our analysis if we should approve a plan development or not. And so we are typically looking to see that it's within that master plan range, or that the applicant is telling us, well, nothing's been built in this area and it's supposed to be a whole bunch of things built, and or whatever it may be. So really it goes back to the master plan, and we are very thoughtful, I think, here at the planning department and within the county of targeting development to certain areas that have the infrastructure to handle them, and preserving those areas that may not have that infrastructure. All right. Any other questions? Mr. Hunt, you wanted to say a couple words to close us out?
Thank you, Jeremy. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Hunt. I'm the Deputy Planning Director here with the Prince George's Planning Department. I want to, again, thank you all for coming out and joining us today on this great topic for the planned development zones. You heard from the Planning Director first. You heard from Jeremy. You've heard from Sherry Connor, the Division Chief with Development Review. This topic, I will say, is one of the biggest improvements within our zoning ordinance, because we heard from the community. We heard from, when I say community, the residents. We heard from the developers at the same time. What this planned development zone option does, it provides greater flexibility when it comes to development. So it doesn't require applicants or anyone to kind of lean towards the text amendment process, to which the gentleman was asking about earlier. The text amendment process is one that has to be applicable throughout the county. This process can be specific to that property itself. Okay, and that's what a lot of the applicants want. In addition to that, so it's still allowing it to go through a public hearing process that's going to be beneficial to the community at the same time. So it allows the community to come back and say, to your point, what are those public benefits? How am I going to be able to benefit from this development from my community? Is it going to be through the roadway infrastructure? Is it going to be infrastructure related to the schools, the the housing feature, the affordability in housing? What are those different public art features that are out there that we can think of innovatively to address the concerns that we already have, and also what this potential development could pose on the community? So I will say that this process is one of the biggest improvements that I've seen in Prince George's County, in addition to just kind of looking at planning in general, throughout the nation and the area. This is one of the things that's really proven to be one of the best things out there. So that said, you all have heard what our development process is related to the planned development zones. At this point in time, we want to hear from you all. Are there any improvements to that process that you all can kind of see that could help benefit as well? So if there's anything out there, please feel free to reach out to us to provide some feedback there. That's definitely one of the intents of these brown bag sessions, would be to obtain your feedback on the process, how we can improve, what things are going great with it, right? So kind of seeing, okay, did you all think of everything, or did you not think of everything? Or what some minor improvements you could have in there to the process? Is the timing of the process? So. But again, I want to thank you all for coming out today and also attending virtually here with us today, and all your questions that you've had. If you have any others, please feel free to reach out to the team. We're here for you. Thanks a lot. Have a great rest of your day.